I probably should have left when she told me the meeting was private. But the way her eyes caught mine, half surprise, half something else, made my mouth work before my head could stop it. Then close the door, I said. The sound lingered in the quiet office, sharper than I meant, bolder than I had any right to be. I wasn't supposed to be there. Not in that room, not with her. I was just delivering a stack of reports, fresh from the copier, when the secretary muttered something about privacy. But by then I'd already stepped inside and seen her. She sat at the far end of the table, her blazer draped over the back of the chair, sleeves of a cream blouse rolled just above her elbows. Dark hair swept into a loose knot, a pen balanced between her fingers. She wasn't just older, she carried herself like someone who'd long stopped caring if people noticed. And that made me notice her even more. For a second I froze, standing there like some intern who'd wandered into the wrong world. I was 23, barely a year in the company, and she was, well, she didn't need a title to make me nervous. She was the kind of woman who could end conversations with silence alone. "Those are the quarterly summaries?" she asked, her voice even, almost bored. I nodded too quickly, setting the papers down. "Yeah. Hot off the press." The joke fell flat. She didn't laugh, but I thought I saw the corner of her lip threaten to move. Maybe I imagined it. The secretary cleared her throat. "This meeting's private." That should have been my cue to leave. To walk out, forget her eyes, and never think twice. Instead, my chest tightened, and the words slipped out before I could stop them. "Then close the door." The room went still. Even the hum of the AC felt louder. I wasn't sure if I'd just ruined everything, my job, my reputation, whatever tiny chance of being invisible I had left. But she didn't scold me. Didn't even blink. She just leaned back in her chair, pen tapping once against the table. Bold for someone new. I swallowed, heat rushing into my neck. "Guess I don't know the rules yet." Her eyes stayed on me, too long, long enough that I had to look away. But something about that silence, the weight of it, made me feel like I'd been called out, not for what I'd said, but for what I was trying not to say. I should explain, I never planned for this. I didn't walk into that office thinking about her, about us. But the truth is, sometimes you don't see the line until you're already standing on it. I heard the secretary leave, footsteps fading down the hall. The door clicked shut. For the first time, it was just me and her. "You know," she said finally, her voice quieter now, "most people in this building go out of their way to avoid being noticed." "I'm not most people," I said, though it sounded more like a confession than a claim. Her eyes narrowed just slightly, not anger, more like curiosity. She stood, gathering the reports, and as she walked past me, the edge of her sleeve brushed against my wrist. The lightest touch, probably nothing, but it burned hotter than any mistake I'd ever made. I didn't move. Neither did she. For a second, we just stood there, too close, silence stretching. Then she tilted her head, almost like she was daring me to finish what I'd started. "Be careful," she whispered, and the way she said it didn't sound like a warning. I told myself it was just a moment. A slip. The kind of thing that happens when two people stand too close in a room that's too quiet. But her voice, low, steady, that "be careful" whisper, hung in my chest like a weight I couldn't shake. She turned back to the table, flipping through the reports, but I could see her hand tremble just slightly before she steadied it against the pages. For a woman who never seemed unsure of anything, that detail nearly undid me. I should have left. God knows I should have. Instead, I leaned against the chair opposite her, pretending like I belonged there. "You're different from the others," she said suddenly, not looking up. My throat tightened. "Different how?" Her pen tapped once, then stilled. They keep their heads down. Don't ask questions. Don't look too closely. That last part, look too closely, I felt it like she'd caught me in the act. Because I had been looking. Longer than I should. The way her hair slipped loose when she bent over a file. The way she pressed her thumb against her lower lip when she read. Tiny, ordinary things that became impossible to unsee. You say that like it's a bad thing. I managed. She finally lifted her gaze. For a second, I swore she saw right through me. It could be. The silence after was thick enough to choke on. I shifted, palms sweating, and tried to remind myself of the obvious. She was my boss. A woman nearly twice my age. A line so clear it might as well have been painted across the carpet between us. But rules never seemed so fragile until I was standing in front of her. You're not married, I said before my brain caught up with my mouth. It wasn't a question. More like an observation, pulled from the bare left hand I'd noticed weeks ago. Her eyes darkened, not with anger, something quieter. Divorced. 2 years. She said it like it cost her something to admit. I'm sorry, I said quickly, though I wasn't sure why. Don't be. Her voice softened, a little raw. Some mistakes deserve to end. Something in her tone cut deeper than the words themselves, and I had to look down at the polished wood of the table, anywhere but her face. I wanted to ask what kind of mistakes. I wanted to ask too much. Instead, I muttered, Still, must have been hard. Her laugh was short, humorless. Harder than I thought. Easier than I should admit. I didn't know what to do with that, so I just stood there, gripping the back of the chair like it might steady me. My chest felt tight, too full of something I shouldn't name. When I finally looked up, her eyes hadn't left me. She closed the folder in front of her, sliding it aside. You're not leaving yet, are you? It wasn't a command. It wasn't even framed as a question. But her hand reached out as she said it, fingertips brushing my forearm, just enough to set my pulse hammering. I almost said something I knew I'd regret. Instead, I just stayed. Her fingers brushed my arm, and I told myself it was nothing, just a gesture, just habit. But my body didn't believe it. The warmth lingered long after she pulled away, crawling up my skin, settling in places I didn't want to name. She shifted in her chair, leaning back as if to create space, though her eyes betrayed the opposite. You remind me of someone, she said quietly. I frowned. Someone good? Her lips curved, not quite a smile. Someone I used to know when I was younger. He was braver than he realized. Didn't last. The words carried weight, like a confession half buried in memory. I wanted to ask what happened to him, but I stopped. The room felt too delicate, like any wrong word might shatter it. I leaned back, trying to steady my breathing. Maybe he just needed someone to notice. That made her pause. She studied me like I'd spoken a truth I wasn't supposed to know. Her hand slid from the table, resting on her lap, but her posture didn't relax. It was a stillness charged with something unspoken. I needed to step away, create distance before I lost my grip. I opened my mouth to excuse myself, then her phone rang. The shrill sound cut through the quiet like a blade. She startled slightly, reached for the device on the desk. I turned toward the window, grateful for the interruption, but my heart was still pounding. Hello? Her voice shifted, sharper, professional. A pause, then softer. Yes, I know. I'll call back. She ended the call quicker than she should have. When I glanced back, her expression was unreadable, but her hand stayed on the phone a beat too long. You should probably. I gestured toward the door, though my body didn't move. She shook her head. No. Stay. The word was quieter than the ring that had interrupted us, but louder in its meaning. I swallowed hard. My chest tightened with conflict. Every rule, every warning bell in my head told me to leave. But her eyes told me something else entirely, that she didn't want the silence back after I walked out. I tried to deflect. If someone walks in, they won't. The certainty in her tone left me reeling. I looked down at my hands, fingers clenched into fists against the chair. I wanted to be the one with control, the one who could step away. But the truth was, I couldn't. Not with her this close, not with the air between us heavy enough to taste. She rose slowly from her chair, closing the small distance between us. And when she stopped in front of me, her hand hovered for a second, hesitant, trembling, before it settled against my sleeve. Not a full embrace. Not even daring. Just a touch that said more than words. Her voice broke the silence. Tell me if I'm making a mistake. I couldn't. Not when everything in me screamed to stay right there. Her hand lingered on my sleeve longer than it should have. I could feel her pulse through the thin fabric, or maybe it was mine racing. Either way, either of us moved. Finally, I forced a laugh, shaky, wrong. This is crazy, right? Her eyes didn't waver. Yes. She said it without hesitation, yet she didn't let go. The honesty in her tone should have broken whatever spell we were caught in. But instead, it drew me in further. Because she wasn't denying it. She wasn't pretending. She was admitting the same dangerous truth I felt pressing against my ribs. I took a breath, trying to ground myself. You know I should walk out right now. You should. The words were quick, almost too quick. Then why can't I? I asked, and I hated how raw my voice sounded. Her lips parted, but no sound came. For a heartbeat, all I heard was the hum of the air conditioner, the faint tick of the clock on the wall. Then she whispered, almost to herself, Because I don't want you to. The air shifted. Heavy, unsteady. I leaned back against the table because my knees felt weak. She had said it, she had actually said it, and suddenly there was no going back to the safety of pretending. You'll regret saying that, I murmured. Maybe, she replied, her voice low, eyes locking on mine. But regret I can live with. Silence I can't. I froze. That one line hit deeper than anything else she could have confessed. Because I knew exactly what she meant. The years of holding back, of biting your tongue until you forget what you wanted in the first place. The kind of silence that doesn't protect you, it starves you. I wanted to tell her she wasn't alone in that. That she wasn't the only one suffocating. Instead, I said, I notice everything about you. The words slipped out raw, unpolished, too much. My chest tightened as soon as they left my mouth. Her hand finally dropped from my arm, but she didn't step away. Don't. Her voice cracked slightly. Don't say things you can't take back. I'm not taking it back. We stared at each other, both caught in the trap we'd made. Her eyes searched mine like she was waiting for me to flinch, to fold, to admit it was just the heat of the moment. But I didn't. I couldn't. The sound of footsteps passed in the hallway, muffled but close. We both stiffened, heads turning toward the door. Neither of us spoke until the sound faded. When I looked back at her, she was already watching me, her expression unreadable, but her eyes gave her away. She took a small step closer, enough that I could feel her breath when she spoke. What do you want from me? I didn't answer. Couldn't. The silence between us said more than words ever could. Her question, what do you want from me, was still hanging in the air when the secretary's voice cut through the door. Ms. Rivera? The director's here early. He's asking for you. We both froze. She stepped back sharply, her hand curling into a fist at her side. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked rattled, caught off guard. "Tell him I'll be there in a minute," she called out, voice steady but tight. The footsteps faded, leaving us in the silence again. Except it wasn't the same silence. It was heavier, brittle, on the edge of breaking. I finally spoke. "Rivera?" She looked at me sharply. "What about it?" I hesitated, then said, "My mother used to talk about you." Her face shifted, shock first, then something deeper. "Your mother?" I nodded, heart pounding. "You taught at the university, didn't you? 10 years ago? She was one of your students." History of political thought. She blinked once, twice, then pressed her palm to her temple like the memory had blindsided her. "What was her name?" I swallowed. "Elena Ortiz." The name seemed to stop her breathing. She sank slowly into the chair behind her, eyes fixed somewhere past me. "Elena." I stepped closer, voice quiet now. "You were her favorite professor. She used to say you made her believe she was capable of more than the life she had." She shut her eyes for a moment, her composure cracking at the edges. When she opened them, they glistened, not with tears exactly, but with something unguarded. I remember her. She was brilliant. Too hard on herself, though. Always apologizing for speaking up. "That sounds like her," I said softly. The air between us had shifted again, but not with desire, not only with desire. It was layered now, tangled with history, with something almost too intimate to name. She leaned forward, elbows on the table, her voice low. "And she's gone," I said before I could soften it. The word landed like a stone. 6 years ago. Cancer. Her hand lifted, hovering in the space between us, then slowly settled over mine on the table. Warm, steady. This time it wasn't forbidden. It was human. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and her voice cracked in a way that broke me more than the words. For a moment, we just stayed like that, her hand on mine, both of us lost in the ghosts between us. Then she drew a shaky breath. "You shouldn't be here." "But I am." She looked up, and there was something fierce in her expression now, something I hadn't seen before. "That's exactly the problem." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was a choice waiting to be made, hanging between us like a match above gasoline. Her words, "That's exactly the problem," echoed between us like a verdict. And maybe it was. Maybe she was telling me this was where it ended. But she didn't let go of my hand. I tightened my grip, almost without thinking. "You knew her. You cared about her. That's not a problem." Her jaw worked, like she was holding back more than she could say. "You don't understand. You look at me like—" She stopped, shook her head, pushed away from the table as if distance could save her. "You're too young to carry this kind of weight. To get tangled up in someone like me?" I stood too, my chest burning. "Someone like you? Someone who's already lived too many mistakes. Someone who doesn't get to start over at 46. Her voice cracked, but her gaze stayed locked on mine. "I can't let you waste yourself on me." The honesty of it hurt more than any rejection could. But it wasn't rejection, not really. It was fear. Regret, wrapped in armor. I stepped closer, closing the space she tried to make. My voice came out rough, low. "What if I'm not wasting anything? What if this is the first time I've ever felt like I'm not invisible?" Her eyes flickered, like I'd struck something she couldn't hide. She exhaled slowly, shoulders trembling. "You shouldn't say things like that." "But it's true." The silence that followed was heavy, pulsing with everything unsaid. She turned her face away, but I saw her bite her lip, the way her hand twitched at her side like she wanted to reach for me but couldn't. I couldn't stand it anymore. "You told me not to be silent," I whispered. So I won't. When she looked back, I saw her walls crumbling. Her eyes were wet now, though she fought it. God, you make this impossible. Or maybe it was always impossible, I said. And we just stopped pretending it wasn't. She let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. For the first time, she didn't fight the space between us, she let it dissolve. Slowly, carefully, like she was testing the air, she reached up and pressed her palm against my cheek. Her hand trembled, but she didn't pull away. I can't promise this will be right, she whispered. I'm not asking for right, I breathed. Just real. Her eyes searched mine, desperate, questioning. Then the silence folded around us again, loaded, fragile, final. But this time it didn't break us. It bound us. She leaned her forehead against mine, the faintest touch, and closed her eyes. Then stay. Just stay. And in that moment, everything else, rules, years, fear, fell away. We stayed like that for a long time, her forehead against mine, her hand warm on my cheek, as if moving even an inch would undo everything we had just admitted without saying it outright. The office was quiet again, the world outside carrying on as if nothing had changed. But inside that room, everything had. When she finally pulled back, it wasn't with the sharp retreat I'd feared. Instead, she studied me, her eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. Tired, yes, but also alive in a way that made my chest ache. You should know, she said gently. I never wanted this to happen. Not with you. I know, I replied. And that's why it matters. She let out a shaky breath, half relief, half surrender. For once, she didn't try to put up walls or hide behind her authority. She just let herself be seen. That was the shift neither of us could take back. She had carried regret for years, convincing herself that silence was safer than risk. I had carried my own kind of shame, too young, too unimportant, invisible in rooms like these. But in each other, we'd found the one thing neither of us expected, proof that maybe, despite the differences, we weren't too late. The knock on the door came again, softer this time. The secretary's voice. Ms. Rivera? They're waiting. She didn't flinch. She just smiled faintly, a curve of the lips that felt like a secret only for me. I'll be right there, she called back, then turned to me again. So what now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her hand slid down my arm, fingertips grazing my wrist before she let go. Now we stop pretending we don't see what's in front of us. No guarantees, no rules. Just honesty. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a promise of forever. But it was real. And for the first time, that was enough. When I left her office later, the world felt different. The same fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the same stack of reports sat heavy in my hands, but I walked out with something I hadn't carried before, a quiet certainty. I wasn't invisible anymore. And she, for all her fears, wasn't trapped in regret anymore. Together, we'd pulled each other out of silence and into something fragile, risky, but alive. Sometimes the lines we're told never to cross are the very ones that force us to see who we are. For her, it was realizing that regret doesn't have to define the rest of her life. For me, it was learning that being seen, truly seen, is worth the risk of being broken. Maybe that's the point of this story, not that it ended perfectly, but that it ended honestly. Sparkles, did you enjoy the story? Speech Balloon, what kind of stories would you like to hear next?